was born here. My mother was born here. My grandmother was born here. My grandmother was born off of Bradshaw and the Jackson Road. And her grandfather had come to Sacramento. He was born in Scotland, came to Michigan, came to New York first, came to Michigan, was one of the early Mormon converts. And then they sent him out to Sacramento as a missionary, because at that time Mormons had great ideas about California and adding it to their kingdom. So anyway, my grandmother was born there. My mother was born at 23rd and H Street at home. And then I was born during the World War II in Sutter Memorial Hospital. Actually, my memories of going to Weinstock are somewhat wrapped up with the people of next door to us. We lived in the Heilbronn Oaks area of Sacramento, which has now been sort of included with Curtis Park. The people next door to us were Mr. and Mrs. Gerber. Their daughters was Marion Armstrong. She lived there with her husband, Leighton, and she was a buyer for Weinstock. So even before I can actually remember going there, I can remember going over to the Gerbers. And one of the things that Marion did, Marion was a buyer, she went back to New York. Now in my little world, New York was, it could have been Oz as far as I was concerned. She brought me back a white lamb, which played Mary Had a Little Lamb. So that is my first Weinstock recollection. Marion later went on to become one of the first women presidents of a major department store, when she became president of Weinstock Ale Company. Then I can remember going when I was probably 5 or 6. It was a big deal to go downtown. Sacramento was small in those days. It probably was, 50,000, I'm not sure. But it was a very circumscribed space. Downtown was downtown. And our part of downtown was probably 3 blocks. It ran from Weinstock down to Hales, which would have been from 9th to 12th. We did not go below 9th. We didn't go above 12. So that was just our little corner of the world. I would go into Weinstock with my mother, my grandmother, and we would buy clothes. Couple of things that I remember, probably the first escalator I ever saw was in Weinstock. Probably the first escalator in Sacramento was at Weinstock. Before that, we'd had the elevators with the attendants in their white gloves, asking you what floor, where you wanted to go, and they would announce ladies' underwear, china, whatever. But anyway, escalators were a big deal, and Weinstock was the first to have them. The other thing would be the Christmas windows. Christmas windows were a big deal. The other thing, in reverse to the milk bar, which was little children, there was also a lunch counter at Weinstock. It was on the 12th Street side of Weinstock. And it was a serpentine, it was a counter. There were no sit-down booths or tables. And it was like a serpentine. There were 3 counters that jutted out. And this was where we would go and have our lunch if we weren't willing to go to the Hotel Sacramento or the Hotel Senator or Bedell's. But we would go to the lunch counter at Weinstock, and there was no real order to it. What you would do is you would look around and you would see, well, who's going to get up? Who has just taken their last bite? and you would stand directly behind them. And as soon as they got up, you would slip into the chair. And they served typical American food of that era. They had tuna sandwiches, egg salad sandwiches, hot roast beef sandwiches, tapioca pudding, Jell-O. Very, very American. Okay, I was thinking back to the milk bar and the fact that it was our world. It was scaled to us. You could sit at the little, you didn't have to have mom and dad there paying for you. It was your world. And I'm sure I was left there while my mother went to shop. And I was thinking back that there weren't other places where children could be, I don't know whether I want to say little adults. There wasn't Disneyland, there weren't theme parks, there wasn't Fairy Tale Town. Really the only places that had child-sized things that I can remember is at the State Fair every year, which at that point was on Stockton Boulevard. They would have the little boats that you could ride around in, and a little roller coaster, quote unquote. And then there was a pony ride in William Land Park where you could go. But there you had to have your parents. At the State Fair you had to have your parents. So the milk bar was really a chance for you to be a little grown-up. You sat at a counter, someone served you, you asked for what you wanted, and that was it. You would sit down at the, let me tell you a little bit about the children's department. It was added on. It was not part of the original Weinstock building. And they pushed through to 11th Street, about halfway through, 11th Street, about halfway between L and K. And they built their children's department. So it wasn't as old as the rest of Weinstock's. And it was much, as my memories of it, it was much brighter, much cleaner, set up more like if they had built a department store in the late 40s or early 50s, how it would have looked. And the milk bar, they broke through Weinstock's wall so that you came down a ramp into the children's department, and right as you came down the ramp, to your right was the milk bar. And it had little seats, it was a crescent-shaped counter, and there was a person behind the counter. And it turns out that one of my friends, who I made just after being back to Sacramento, we were talking about Weinstock's one day several years ago, and her mother worked at Weinstock's. So when my friend was probably, it would have had to have been, she would have been in high school, her mother got her the job working at the milk bar. So she said she had a chair, she sat in the chair, and they had two kinds of milk. They had white milk and they had chocolate milk, and she would ask the child what kind of milk they wanted, and then she would serve them in a little Elsie's cup. And they could sit there as long as they wanted. And as I said, parents left their children there, I'm sure. And it was just plain grown-up.